I guess we'll get started. It's a couple of minutes past noon here, Eastern Daylight Time, so I think we'll get going. It looks like we have probably the bulk of our audience with us this afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone, and good morning to our colleagues in Central and Western Canada. It's Stephen Carey again from Ryerson University in Toronto. And on behalf of the CAFKE Professional Development Committee, I'd like to welcome everyone to the second part of our two-part webinar series, A Co-op for All, Fostering an Environment of Inclusiveness. Before I get started, I'd just like to mention a couple of housekeeping items. First off, all the telephone lines into the webinar, into the ReadyTalk software have been muted by Nicole in the CAFKE office. And to eliminate any extraneous noise with so many people on the line, we'd appreciate you leaving the line muted unless you have a question or a comment. In most cases, we'll prompt you for those. If you have to unmute your line, just dial *7, and to mute your line again, dial *6. Second, to make sure that we get through the webinar in a decent amount of time, we're going to have our speakers complete their presentations before responding to any questions. Having said that, you can pose your questions at any time during the webinar via the chat window, which is in the lower left-hand corner of the ReadyTalk interface. And we'll raise them during the question period following the presentations. We expect today's webinar to run about an hour to an hour and 15 minutes. And I just thought I'd start with a little bit of a recap for those who maybe didn't participate in last Tuesday's webinar. We had presentations from Anne-Marie Fannin, the CAFKE president, Marie-Claude Gagnon, an accessibility policy officer in the Human Rights Office at the University of Ottawa, and then Philip Brown and Kathleen McDowell from a management co-op at the University of Toronto Scarborough, and Colleen Reed, who's the Associate Director of the Accessibility Services Office at the University of Toronto Scarborough. The three of them did a presentation on accessibility and the journey that they'd gone through in terms of implementing a wider accessibility policy for their office. Anne-Marie Fannin also discussed some recent changes to the language of the CAFKE definition to make it more inclusive, and if you haven't seen them, I'd encourage everyone to review them on the CAFKE website. And Marie-Claude Gagnon actually did a presentation just sort of giving us an overview of the wider legal landscape with respect to accessibility. Last week's presentation prompted some questions about how we can support students through the employment process, especially during the interviewing phase, what kind of support is needed for students with mental health needs, and when is an appropriate time to advocate for students during the employment process. Those were some of the main questions that came out of last week's presentation. Nicole from the CAFKE office will be sending everyone links to the webinar recordings, last week's and this week's, the speaker presentation materials, and any other resources this afternoon following today's event. So last Tuesday gave us a big picture and sort of an institutional view of the topic. And today we'd like to introduce student and employer perspectives. Our speakers today include Lisa Kelly from the Canadian Business SenseAbility, an organization that works with businesses to provide the resources necessary to transform businesses into fully inclusive workplaces. We have Tim Rose, who is the Diversity Project Lead at Magnet. He's also an entrepreneur, a disability activist, and writer who will provide us with a lived experience in terms of a student going through the employment process. And then we have Francis Vauclair, a senior recruiter at Sodexo Canada, who will tell us more about Sodexo's diversity and inclusion employment strategy. So then that will be followed by a question period. So if you would be so kind, Lisa, if you'd like to kick things off and get started with your presentation.
Sure. Thank you very much. Can everyone hear me?
Yep.
Great.
Yep.
Okay, and let's just get the slides moving here. So my name is Lisa Kelly, and I'm the Training Development Team Lead for SenseAbility. Thank you very much for inviting me to speak, and hello to my co-presenters. I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say. I'm here from a number of perspectives. So I am the Training Development Lead for Canadian Business SenseAbility, and that's a national network of business leaders to understand the immense value that people with disabilities bring to an organization, but not only as talented employees, also as consumers and investors and innovators. So I'll touch on a few of those points throughout my presentation. I am also a person with a disability. I have worked as an employment counselor, helping people with disabilities transition back into the workforce after injury. I'm the mother of 2 students who have benefited greatly from the co-op education experience. So I bring a number of diverse perspectives to this. What I'd like to talk to you about today is the role of diversity and innovation in training, or in business, sorry. And I'm having trouble moving my slides forward here for whatever reason. If somebody can cue it maybe for me, thank you. I want to talk about how to level the playing field. I want to talk about business, disability, and the co-op experience. And I finally like to end talking a little bit about our members and some of the people that make up and programs that are involved in Canadian business sensibility. All right, and if you have any questions, I'd be happy to address them either at the end of the presentation or offline at the end of, feel free to ask for my contact information. I'd share it with you. I think where I'd like to start is this idea of transitions. So the transitions between school and training and education and work are critical for all young people, but for young people with a disability, these transitions are particularly important. That's a quote from the Business Council of Australia. We all know that Canada's population is aging and that there's labor shortages across certain industries such as technology. And it's important that all students have equal access to that. We at SenseAbility understand that people with disabilities are a valuable talent source. And like all students entering the workforce, they bring a lot of benefits to the employer. And that includes fresh perspectives and a strong work ethic, a desire to learn, the need to earn an income, and also the desire to make a difference. So all those things are really critical. But we also know from statistical and anecdotal evidence that students with disabilities face greater barriers in both talent recognition and in gaining meaningful employment. The statistics show that people with disability have completed, there's I think almost close, a little over 250,000 who have completed post-secondary education, and yet they're vastly underrepresented in the workforce. And the more severe the disability, the lower the employment rate. So this is a challenge. If we look at diversity and innovation in business, it's a lost opportunity to not have this pool of candidates working. Why? Well, there is that aging population. So we know that if we ignore this pool of candidates, it reduces the number of people that are available to work with the employers. Canadian business also understand that as we move on to the global stage, innovation is key to future success. So people who bring different perspectives, diverse perspectives, and strong problem-solving skills are a huge attribute in terms of the innovation goals that companies have. Work cultures that support employees from diverse backgrounds and experiences have been shown to have higher productivity, engagement, and innovation. So when you're out there talking to business and you're talking about some candidates that you have who have disability, those are some talking points that you can bring up. Diverse teams have a far better chance of generating new idea combinations, and that's truly groundbreaking. And we see that across a lot of tech companies. So for instance, Apple comes to mind. People with disabilities are often overlooked in the diversity mix. Yet we know from studies, and in this case I'm going to talk about Rich Donovan, who's the CEO of the Return on Disability Group. Rich is an expert in gathering and analyzing corporate performance data on companies that include people with disabilities, both as employees and customers. And what he's been able to document is that companies that hire people with disabilities actually perform better. So again, all talking points when you go out there and you're talking to employers about the benefits of hiring people with a disability. Now, we know that an essential element in assisting students with disabilities to gain employment is that they be given the same work experience as people who don't have a disability. And ideally, that would be as early as high school. Now, I understand I'm not talking to high schools here, However, it makes it that much more critical then that the students have that experience in their post-secondary education. We know that students with disability bring all the attributes of any other co-op students, but in addition, they bring really unique perspectives. They add diversity, great problem-solving skills. And we know that we should encourage them to seek out opportunities and that sometimes they won't. So one of the messages that I would have for your organization is that we are encouraging you to actively reach out to students with disabilities and encourage them to join your co-op program. There's a number of reasons why they might be hesitant to do so, and we'll touch on those. Those opportunities are shown in studies to lead to successful labor market attachment after graduation. Okay, next slide. Sorry, I'm having trouble, like I said, queuing. So we want to level the playing field for students. That means that we want to give them the same work experience that students without disability have. And it's critically important that they gain both hard and soft skills as well as networking opportunities. We know that from a lot of studies out there that prior work experience and vocational education experiences are a predictor of successful employment outcomes once they graduate. So it's absolutely critical to this group that they be given the same opportunities as people without disabilities. We also know that there are far fewer students with disabilities that have had summer or part-time co-op or apprenticeship experiences. So there's a gap to be filled there, and my challenge to you today would be how do we solve that together? I was an employment counselor for a little over 5 years, and I can tell you that it was my experiences that employers are all looking for the same things. They're looking for students to have experience in their field of study, so that's critical, important, but they're also looking for students that have had a recent work history. We know that students with disabilities sometimes face more barriers, so that sometimes there's gaps on the resume and it looks a little different than students that don't have disabilities. So again, that's where the co-op experience becomes so critical. We also know that employees are looking for keywords, especially when anybody's resume has to get past some applicant tracking system, which is found on any kind of job board. And there's a list of both hard and soft skills. Now, on the soft skills side, there's a lot of things that students learn that are absolutely critical to the employer, and we hear that from our employers a lot. They need to know how to dress in the office. They need to appreciate appropriate workplace behaviors and norms, or, for instance, even how to deal with conflict resolution. If you've had a disability or you have a disability, chances are that you were probably consciously or unconsciously screened out of many of the programs and services out there that exist to help you find work, or perhaps by the employer during the recruitment process. So you're far less likely to have gotten these skills in high school, part-time, or even during the university years. On the hard skilled side, you might need to learn some core skills that are industry specific. With significant and paid work experience, graduates with disabilities actually find work far more quickly and rarely fall out of the labor market, underscoring the need to engage this group and provide opportunities for early work experience. This is particularly important when you look at the unemployment rate. So if you look at the national unemployment rate, it's something like 7%, I think, right now. But if you look at the unemployment rate for people with disabilities, it's close to 50%, and we believe it's much higher than that because people either opt out or don't self-report as having a disability. Negative attitudes are still the most significant barrier faced by individuals with disabilities in both education and the workplace. There's been a great deal of work on unconscious bias, and for anybody who's not familiar with that, I would encourage you to look up something like, for instance, Harvard's Project Implicit study. So what does the co-op experience provide? Well, all students with or without a disability gain confidence, they gain job skills, they're going to build a network. But this is particularly important, again, because of that job gap in the high school experience for students with disabilities. For instance, on the building confidence piece, for students with disabilities, often not only do they gain confidence, but it gives them the opportunity to focus and actually define their abilities and talents. They might never have learned to articulate what they're able to do, with concrete examples that can be used in interviews on behavioral-based questions to counter the perceptions of other people who might define them by their disabilities. So it's absolutely critical for this cohort that they be given the opportunity to not only build confidence, but to actually define what they're able to do. Obviously gaining job skills, and that's huge. So co-op gives all students, I'd say this is both with disability and without, the opportunity to get the hard and soft skills, understand workplace culture and responsibilities, but also helps you with resume preparation, interview skills, training, building a LinkedIn profile, all critical elements of the job search process. And finally, and perhaps most importantly, it's the chance to build a network, and that's absolutely key. The workplace, our first workplaces, are the place where we meet people who we can connect to later when we actually go out and job search. It may not lead directly to a job, but this is where somebody is going to meet potential mentors, identify coaches who might give them some feedback on how to accept and respond appropriately to feedback, and peers that they can establish connections with as they move out into job search that can, give them the leads and word-of-mouth leads that we know lead to most jobs. So let's just take a moment to look at disability and the co-op department. We would encourage you, some of the best practices as we talk to some of our members, is that you actively reach out to students with disabilities. They've perhaps been discouraged or not made aware of all the opportunities that are out there, so it requires active outreach on your behalf. We would also encourage you as the co-op department to have accessible spaces and places and a digital presence, but also process and services. You might have barriers that you're not even aware of. I was at a co-op office last week, and we were talking about the size of print and how that actually might be sending signals to somebody. It was very, very small. I was having trouble reading it, but for somebody with a vision loss, it would be even more difficult if your websites aren't accessible. So you need to be aware of all the unconscious signals you might be sending to people with disability. And because disability is so broad, it covers both visible, invisible, episodic, temporary, physical, sensory, learning. It covers such a broad spectrum, you might have to take a step back and start looking at some of those processes, services, spaces, and digital presence. Be aware of unconscious bias. Obviously be aware of conscious bias as well, but you might want to have a think about that and take some training. Support your staff with training and resources. If they're not familiar with disability, oftentimes we find people can be a little bit leery about stepping into this area for fear of making a mistake or looking foolish, so support them with training resources. Make them aware of what's out there to help them. I'm certainly not a disability expert, but I certainly know where to go if I have a question. So you might be compiling lists of resources and organizations that you can go to with your question. Finally, have a diverse department that actually reflects your student population. So if we're not seeing disability diversity in your office, chances are that the students are less likely to come in. Some other things that you might find when you're having students come in. You're probably, and this was certainly when I worked with people who have a disability and are trying to look for work, it takes a little bit more time. That can pay off in big ways, but you need to make sure that you allot more time to build a rapport with the student so that they can discuss what they need in order to succeed in the co-op experience. As with any student, that means that you need to provide time to learn about what their abilities and experience is, but you also might need to spend some time learning about what their perceptions of what they can do are. Understand the broad framework of their disability in order to anticipate or help with requests for workplace adjustments. Most people call them accommodations. I'm going to refer to them as adjustments. And you really do need to understand and acknowledge their need for adjustments. Typically, they'll know what they need, and we call it ATP, ask the person. But you may need to help them know where to find suitable supports, and you're definitely going to need them to coach them on how to broach the need for adjustments and supports with the employers. People are, in my experience, most job seekers, that's the thing they're most worried about. When to do that, how to do that, without risking the opportunity. Oftentimes what we find is you need to be a little bit more flexible because every person is unique, as is each disability and how it presents. So every work environment is going to be unique as well. So when you combine all those things, you're never going to have the exact same set of circumstances, the exact same tools, or the exact same approach. So I would encourage you to embrace flexibility. A successful co-op experience obviously paves the way to an successful assignment. And again, one of those things is to request appropriate adjustments for the interview, as well as how to broach the need for possible adjustments on the job. You're probably going to need to provide ongoing support throughout the placement. When in doubt, we always say ask the person. If you're not sure about that, there's a lot of organizations that can provide additional supports and perhaps help you with any questions that you have. We're here to direct you to whoever might be able to help you as well. It's not like you're going to get it 100% right, but I think if you at least are open to trying, that's where we can start. In terms of disclosure, and again, I'm trying to move ahead one. Okay. It's, of course, obviously voluntary, and disclosure is always up to the person. It is a very personal decision. So it's voluntary unless the disability impacts the person's ability to actually do the work. It's protected information and confidential, so you cannot share this information with an employer or with other individuals in the office without the consent of the individual that you're working with. Now, there's lots of things that go into the decision on whether or not you disclose. The type of disability may affect the decision. So in my own case, I've just started talking about my disability within the last year or two, and I'm quite long in the tooth. So it really depends on the individual and what the disability is. It also might be affected by whether the disability is visible or invisible and whether there's a need for an adjustment. If you are generally, again, there's no one size fits all every time you disclose, if you are disclose the need for the adjustment, but not the name or the category of the disability. We don't encourage that. What the employer needs to know is what you're able to do or not do, so focus on abilities, not on disability. Whether or not to disclose, again, is it relevant? Consider the consequences, both good and bad, about disclosure. So understand, be able to articulate to the business why placing a student with a disability helps the business. Provide them with interested and talented candidates, but also understand that by placing a student with a disability in a co-op, you're helping to break down barriers and attitudes about the potential and the abilities of people with disabilities when they go out into full-time work opportunities. An employer is only able to respond effectively to diversity initiatives when it's aimed at increasing the presence of people with disabilities in the workforce if people choose to disclose the need for appropriate workplace adjustments. Just a quick note on workplace adjustments. A lot of people, when they get to this, they start thinking this is going to be huge dollars and we're asking people to widen the sides of doors, and in some cases that may be appropriate. But in general, people offer workplace adjustments all the time to employees. If you've ever had an employee who asked to work from home one day a week, or to take 2 coffee breaks instead of 1, 2 shorter coffee breaks instead of 1 long one, that's an adjustment. And typically, most workplace adjustments, 57% of workplace adjustments, cost nothing. The next 37% cost less than $500, a one-time cost. So the vast majority of adjustments are actually very inexpensive. They're, in Ontario, for instance, covered under the AODA. They're the law anyway. So, we need to start talking to business about this, and the fact that all we're doing is asking people what they need in order to be the best employee possible. And I think that happens all the time with people without disabilities. It happens all the time. What do you need to succeed? And we need to get around this idea that the workplace adjustment is an extra. for people with disabilities. It isn't. It just allows them to be effective and productive in their performance on the job. I would also add that when you're counseling a student on whether to disclose or not to disclose, one of the things you might want to consider is how can you expect that student to be the best they are in the interview, to do their best, if you're asking them to hide part of who they are. Now, that may be up to the students and they may choose not to, but you don't want to take that decision away from somebody. Let's talk a bit about how do you know if an employer is an inclusive employer. I've got a list of a couple things here that might be quick tips on how to decide whether or not an employer is inclusive. First of all, do they invite people, diverse groups, but also people with disabilities to apply for jobs? If they are, chances are they're open to people disclosing the need for accommodations. Do they have accessible spaces, places, processes, services, and websites? That's a big clue. You can often go onto their website and see if they have mentoring programs or internships for people with disabilities. Do they have an ERG, an employee resource group, or a disability employee network? Do they promote and celebrate disability-related days and events? And do they work with disability-related organizations? A big clue is whether or not they have our logo on their website, and you can find a list of all our members on our website as well. A quick note about our members. Employers, and I'm not going to pretend that all our members are experts in disability, but they are trying, and it is an organic process. So please be patient and somewhat flexible as we all strive to get this right. You're going to need to allot additional time when you're working with employers for, talking about adjustments, communication, details, and documentation. So that's an important part. If you're going to place somebody with a disability, make sure that you're giving them the supports. And familiarize yourself with the work environment to ensure that it's going to be a good fit, that it's going to work for both the person and the business. Our members, as I said, can be found on our website. We encourage you to reach out to the diversity and inclusion leaders in each organization and become part of their talent pipeline. Our members have tried over the years a number of both traditional and non-traditional approaches to recruit candidates with disabilities. The traditional approaches might be working with job boards like Workopolis or Magnet, working with recruiting agencies that specialize in disability, companies like Benedage or AbleWorks, ARES. They've also offered internships and memberships through organizations like Career Edge, Lime Connect, or Dolphin. I don't know if you're familiar with any of those. Again, I can give you more information and links if you're not. And finally, oftentimes they work with disability-related agencies like spinal cord injury. That's been limited success. What we typically hear from most of our members is we need a bigger pipeline, we need more candidates. So some of our members have started to use increasingly customized and creative approaches to attract and retain people with disabilities on their staff. So I'm going to give you an example of 3 of our members. One is RBC, and in 2016, just last year, RBC hosted a networking event for professionals with disabilities. And they actually hosted a webinar across Canada for job seekers with a disability, and they talked about the process. They had a couple people from the organization talk about their experiences in terms of, coming on board. They then arranged for there actually to be an in-person networking event. And it went so well. They brought all hiring managers as well as business unit managers to the event and interviewed people on site and had a number of hires on site. That was so successful, actually, next year they're going to do one of those for each of their business units. So tech will have one, their customer service will have one, finance will have one. It was very, very successful. So there's an example of somebody getting a little bit creative to reach out to people. Sodexo has also used a lot of innovative recruitment approaches such as Dolphin Mentoring Days. We're talking to them about some cross-country disability awareness training. And they're working with agencies like Ready, Willing, and Able to familiarize their managers with people with disabilities. Accenture is another organization that we do some work with, and they're using speed interviewing events. And not only does that provide potential candidates the opportunity to get some networking and interview experience, but just as importantly, it's giving the hiring manager valuable interaction experience so that their comfort level is raised. All our members are open to working directly with the colleges and university co-op offices, so I encourage you to reach out to them. Thank you very much, and if you have any questions, I look forward to hearing from you. With that, I'll turn it over to the next speaker. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lisa. Now we have Tim Rose from Magnet coming up. Tim, are you ready to go?
Am I muted?
Yep, I can hear you now, Tim.
Okay, we're on. We're ready to go. And
okay, great.
Stefan or Nicole, I'll just let you know when I want to move the slide ahead because I don't have presenter privileges on my iPad.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, yeah. Nicole's going to take care of that. Thanks.
Great.
Okay.
So, hi everyone, and thank you very much for inviting me to speak to you today as part of this webinar. I think this is a fantastic topic, and I'm so happy to be working with CAPKI as well as with great organizations like Canadian Business Sensibility to really shine a much-needed light on disability employment. And before I move to my first slide, I'd just like to say that when I put these slides together, it was with the idea that a lot of it will be my own story and speaking about my own experiences. And so if there's anything that isn't in the slides, because they are pretty basic, that you'd like me to expand on, please feel free to leave a comment or have a question. So if I can move to the first slide. So really what I'm going to talk to you today is my employment story primarily and the experiences that I had as a person with a disability, and I'll talk a little bit about that to begin, and then move on to what I experienced in terms of barriers, but also opportunities. And then talk a little bit about Magnet, the organization that I'm lucky enough to work for, and what we're trying to do to address some of these barriers and opportunities and how we can work with your offices to make that happen. And then, of course, there'll be time for questions at the very end of all the presenters. Next slide, please. So really, my story starts with my disability, and it's not on the slide because I never like to write it out, but I do like to tell people about it. So I was lucky enough to be born with cerebral palsy spastic quadriplegia. So I have the use of 2 fingers on my left hand and full vocal range, and that's pretty much it. So I'm a full-time wheelchair user. I also have a service animal, and I needed physical support my entire life and will likely continue to do that for a very long time. It never really slowed me down growing up, though, and I attended 2 fantastic post-secondary institutions, the first one being Carleton in Ottawa, so any Ottawa people, shout out to you. And then I went abroad and did my Master's of Law in Human Rights at the University of Nottingham, which I successfully completed in 2011. After that, I came home to Canada, and I was quite sure and largely very naive that I was going to walk into a job right away. Through university, I had been incredibly supported. I'd never actually accessed the co-op services at my university because in my 3rd day on campus, I ended up volunteering with the student-run Disability Access Center that was run through the Students Association, and ended up working there for the majority of my time at Carleton. And then throughout my experiences at the University of Nottingham, I also had placements or jobs through the program, but they weren't necessarily what you would consider a co-op opportunity. So, but when I came home, my I was largely unemployed for a long time, and it was a shock to me. I'd had great grades, and I'd had a huge amount of success within university, and I was startled to find that wasn't continuing. And one of the reasons that wasn't continuing was because of some of the barriers that Lisa's already spoken about with regards to people with disabilities and some of the challenges that we face. And one of the big ones for me was that a lot of the entry-level roles in the fields that I was looking at are things that I physically can't do, and so I was applying to, more management or personnel management, roles that I was better suited to do, and was being told that I didn't have enough experience or opportunities. And so there were gaps in my resume. There were also instances where I didn't disclose my disability in my cover letter, but then when I was called for an interview, I did, because I'm in a wheelchair full-time and need to make sure that the interview location is accessible, and then was told that offer was very awkwardly but quickly rescinded. So these things still do happen in this day and age, and I think that working with co-op offices across the country, we can start to change the conversation around disability employment. Because of all of these barriers, my confidence was at an all-time low, and I never felt valued. I was living on a disability pension, despite the fact that I was highly educated and highly motivated to work, and I never felt like I could contribute in a way that I wanted to. And every door I tried to go through at least, was slammed in my face. Then the opportunity came about where I decided, after 4 years of struggle, to start my own business, and I started an organization called Disability Positive Consulting, which focuses on my view of disability positivity in business, which is the idea, as Lisa's already spoken about, that disability is actually a huge asset. So I had an organization, and through that work, through some consulting work that I did, I met Mark Patterson, who's the executive director at Magna, and Mark looked at me. We had a great chat one day, and he looked at me and said, what are your salary expectations? And my first thought was, please don't take advantage of me in this situation. Turns out that he didn't take advantage of me in this situation, and I'm now happy to be a diversity project lead at Magnet. And I'll talk a little bit about Magnet in just a little bit. Next slide, please. So what are some of the barriers that I experienced? In my experiences as someone living with a significant physical disability and trying to look for work. And this applies mostly when I was out of school, but I think a lot of the lessons are extremely relevant to the students with disabilities that your offices will see on a daily basis. So the first one is fear and stigma. There is still a huge amount of that that is rampant for people with disabilities in certain situations. So that is definitely a big one. Lack of employer awareness, and Lisa spoke about this as well, with regards to people with disabilities and employers not really being sure how to handle people with significant disabilities or insignificant ones. As I mentioned, a couple employers that offered me an interview had no idea what to do when I said I had a disability, and their kind of go-to response, which was the wrong response, was to try and pull that back. The organizational landscape is what I would consider fractured, and that's not to say that there aren't many organizations doing fantastic work, but as a job seeker with a disability, I never knew who to turn to. All right, when I was at Carleton, I knew exactly who to go to for my accessibility needs. I knew who to go to for, student support, for the Student Association and trying to have a social life and a bit of a community network. But when it came to employment, there's so many organizations out there that I never knew who to turn to. I did end up going to an employment agency when I was kind of in the depths of despair, if I can call it that, a little over dramatically. And in 4 months of working with me, the only jobs they sent me were for a Starbucks barista. Okay. Starbucks barista and a security guard at the aquarium. Again, they had no idea how to handle someone of my education level, but I had no idea where to turn or what organization to go to. Now that I work in the sector, I have a bit more of an idea, but I think that idea of everyone being siloed and working in their own organizations and without kind of reaching out is a huge problem in the disability community. Another big thing, change is, as it is in many situations, change is very slow to happen. I since being on the team here at Magnet, I've recognized that there's a lot of employers that it takes time to change the culture away from disability being a bit of a challenge to disability being a massive opportunity and a benefit. So I think that's one of the things I experienced. I just wanted to get in there so bad, but that I was frustrated at the pace of change that occurred. And the final one that I'll mention, and this was really pertinent in my own life, is the lack of engagement for many people with disabilities. And what I mean by that is people with disabilities come out of institutions, or even when they're within their academic institutions, not feeling like they're actively engaged in the labor market. And I think that co-op offices are a huge part of that. I think that if we can make change in that area, it would make a big difference, because for me, if I hadn't had an incredibly supportive family, which includes a mother who's a human resources director, I would have given up a long time ago. And I know many people with disabilities who, after years of looking for work, have given up and who have completely detached themselves from the labor force, excuse me. And so I think that co-op offices have a huge role to play in making sure that people remain engaged and remain motivated once they leave those supports. Next slide. Rush. But what are some of the opportunities? So several signs of change are very much here in my book. There are several emerging champions amongst employers. The one that I'll talk a bit about is our partner, CIBC. So CIBC has become a huge supporter of Magnet and have actually committed to hiring 500 people with disabilities in new team members with disabilities, in 2017. So there are several emerging champions. Lisa also mentioned RBC and some other ones as well, Sodexo. And I think all of those are great examples of what an employer could and should be doing to engage people with disabilities. We have many leaders in the community. David Onley, our former Lieutenant Governor in Ontario, as Mark Wafer, who's part of the Canadian Business Sensibility Group and is a huge advocate for the recruitment of people with disabilities. These are people that the disability community is very much listening to. So that's really important. The government is listening and is engaged. The government of Ontario is coming out with a disability employment strategy within the next few months, and they want to be connected. So that's really important. and there are also several reports that articulate the benefits of disability recruiting, and there's been a lot of research done on that, a lot of it by organizations like Canadian Business Sensibility, and so I think things are starting to change. Next slide. Rush slide. So what is Magnet? And I'll just go over this really quickly. I don't want this to be an ad for Magnet in any way. It's more about my own experiences. But Magnet is an online employment platform that was launched in September 2014. We currently have 90,000 job seekers and over 8,500 employers. We also have 190 partner organizations, including large development projects. And we're basically a system of community hubs that accurately match people, including people with disabilities, to jobs and deliver labor market information. Next slide. Rush slide. And I apologize if anyone here is whining. My service dog needs to go to the bathroom, but we're going to get through this first. So what are we doing in the disability space? So Magnet has been in the disability space. Magnet has been in the disability space since essentially March 2016 when I came on the team. We've had about 400 people with disabilities securely self-identify on our platform, and we've made great strides, but we need that increased capacity, and we're starting to access some of that increased capacity through partners like CIBC and Holland Bloorview. Next slide, please. So what are my key takeaways from my own experiences? I think the first one is that there's still a hugely untapped potential in disability, and I was part of that. I'm now part of hopefully a solution to changing that, but I think there's still a huge market there that co-op offices need to support and need to address. Stigma and fear are huge, still very, very big. People think that in 2016 discrimination doesn't occur. It very much does in the disability space, particularly around employment, and your offices are going to be critical to making a change in that. Confidence is also hugely critical for people with disabilities. And change is starting to happen, and there are huge opportunities to come with the government support that's emerged. So I think that's it. We'll wait for questions at the end, and my contact information is on the slide, which will be shared later. So I guess with that, thank you very much, and I'll turn it over to the next presenter.
Thank you very much, Tim. That was excellent. Really appreciate your comments and your story, your personal story, I think was great. Just a reminder to our audience, if you do have any questions, feel free to enter them in the chat in the lower left-hand corner of the Ready Talk interface, and we'll have those queued up and ready for the presenters. Next up is Francis Vauclair from Sodexo. Francis, if you're ready to go ahead, please do.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Well, first of all, I want to present our company, Sodexo. We are a very large company across the world in more than 90 countries with 425,000 employees across the world. So it's a pretty big company. And just wanted to bring as a presentation more of what we do for diversity and inclusion. So basically, let me just skip to this. Perfect. So just to present to you what our commitment is, basically. So our mission for diversity and inclusion is that it is an inherent part of our culture. It drives our growth, and we know that, and we are striving to make it a big part of our business, both on the business partner side with our employees as well. Our vision, we're committing to providing a work environment that offers equal employment opportunities and growth potential in our continuing effort to attain an inclusive organization. And that really entails to the mission where we want to serve our clients best. And we have a few diversity groups that I'll be presenting with this in this presentation. just general information on us. In 2008, we made diversity and inclusion a global business priority. So that goes for all our groups, which is sexual orientation, indigenous groups, cultures and origins, gender, generations, and people with disabilities. In our business case, the business rationale for Sodexo's commitment to diversity and inclusion drives our ability to attract, develop, and retain the best talent, create and engage and a committed workforce. We do deliver a quality of life services to our clients and customers, and I would include also our employees, as we value our employees as our number one priority. We identify new business opportunities, and we cultivate external partnerships to support business priorities. This is our report card for 2016 in the diversity and inclusion. So all of our Sodexo employees, if you take the Indigenous group, we have 4.93% of our employees that are Indigenous. With visible minorities, we have 31.68%, and people with disabilities, we have a 3.4% of our workforce. The gender diversity, so we have 65% are female and 34% are male. The average of Sodexo employees versus Canadian employees, I'm sorry about that. So the female represents 65.9, as we said, versus 41.2 in the Canadian. The visible and 41.2 of that percentage, is Canadian. Our visible minorities, 18.2% of the 31.68 is a Canadian. And then the Indigenous people, 2.6 are Canadian with the 4.9. And in disabilities, 2% is Canadian and the 3.4. So we are, in our country here in Canada, we're presenting all of our company. We're really strong and adamant on that. So our diversity is very important to us. Slide. So here are the 6 groups. So ADEPT, all disabled employees possess talent. So that's the one that is very important to us, as they are all, but for today's presentation, this is one we'll be talking about. I'll just present the other ones quickly, but we have WIL, which is Women in Leadership and Learning. Our Cultural Diversity Group, which is Cultural Diversity in the Workplace. Our PRIDE for the LGBTA employees. SAGE for Sharing Across Generations. And NAC for the National American and Aboriginal Council. So all of these groups are represented by a series of employees within the company. Myself, I'm part of the Cultural Diversity Group, but we do represent all groups as well. I am a senior recruiter with Sodexo. I've been with the company for 11 years. I've been in this role for the last 6 months. I do come from our operations side, and now I've been in this role for 6 months. And I was a fortunate one to be given this experience today, which is great. I'm very happy to be here. And just to give you a heads up that all employees, we do have a what we call a mentor, which usually is one of our higher roles in the company, which are vice presidents, which would be a mentor to each of these groups. So each of these groups have a mentor. So it's very important. So we do push it very, very hard. As we said, ADEPT is the one we're talking about today. So ADEPT aims to increase the awareness and acceptance of people with disabilities through promotion and education of people with disabilities. ADEPT is committed to demonstrating the value that employees with disabilities bring to the workforce. I will not go through the whole slide, but just to give you what we are, is that we don't proclaim ourselves as experts in the subject, but we do want to show our diversity and inclusion. So we want to offer possibilities of employment for people with disabilities. So we do encourage people when they do apply to actually disclose it. I'm sorry, I'm French speaking, so I'm still having issues with the disclosing term, but they do need to disclose. We do need to know. It's important because we will not discriminate. So it's very important. So that stands for all of the different groups we had, but particularly to the ADEPT. So we want to show our openness to all of the diversity groups. Ability over disability, I think Lisa brought that point up earlier. So I know she didn't steal my punch. But the ability over disability is very important for us. I think in one of the questions that I was asked to answer, it is part of the answer, because basically we should always view disability as a strength and not as a disability. I mean, it's not because you have a disability that you don't have the competency or the skill to perform at the same level as someone that wouldn't have a disability. So we have to keep that in mind. So we have the little saying on the side here that individuals with disabilities are some of the most valuable employees within Sodexo. So the benefits, we do have a larger talent pool, better productivity, an increased morale, lower turnover, and better safety record. So that's important as well. And as a company with the number of employees that I've mentioned earlier, we do want a safe environment. And I know that a video will be sent to all of you after we have a video that was produced from one of our Loblaws sites in Toronto in the GTA area, where we are talking about the safety, about the absenteeism, which is very low within people with disabilities. So it's a very interesting 2 minutes 40-second video about that. So it's one of our sites where we have, I think, 7 or 8 employees working on that site, more on a frontline basis. But our company is looking forward to hiring people for our salaried roles, and that's what we're looking into doing. Our partners, as you can see, those are the different partners for all of our diversity groups. So as Lisa mentioned earlier, we are part and business partners with SenseAbility, and we do have like the Conference Board of Canada, Aboriginal Business, all the different groups here that are mentioned. Our role in the community, just to give you a highlight, we did a talk about diversity with some Syrian refugees in Montreal, Talent Untapped in Toronto. That's the video I talked to you about a few moments ago, which will be sent to you, which is the video that was done on people with disabilities at the Loblaws site. We were part of the CCAD Gala, where we received again our gold membership for the Canadian Business Council for Aboriginal business. And then the Move for Generation 1 in Calgary, which is for our SAGE group. We'll have questions after. If I may, I would just like to add 2 little things. I know I was asked to answer a question of how can we better prepare our students for the workforce, our students that would have the disabilities. So I think there are a lot of myths on that, and I think first key would be a question of respect, and respect being mutual, obviously, but I think the employer, I'm not talking only about Sodexo, but as an employer, you do have to show respect, and you have to show openness, which is, I think, what is probably part of the discrimination, where people do not have an open mind. So basically, when we meet someone and we have an employee that applies to a position, and they would say that they're blind, they would disclose that, and we would ask them what are their needs, what do they need to have specifically. For example, we have an employee at the Loblaws site that has a visibility disability. And he did ask for his locker, in the dressing room, to have a large orange sticker on it so that he would recognize it. So as Lisa said earlier, they're not expensive costs. It didn't cost a lot to do that, but that was just a basic thing that he needed. For the rest, he felt very comfortable. We had people that are blind, that are not blind, but that are mute, that are working for us. The only thing they needed was for notepads and pens to be left on specific areas where they could at least communicate with the different employees. So it's all little things like that, as Lisa said, that are not that expensive, but that can make a big, big difference in someone's life. Should employees be sharing this on an interview? And of course they should. They should share the information. They should disclose it. I think, as I said earlier, and as Lisa said, we had to set disability as a strength and as an ability. We know that employees with disabilities will have more resilience. They're usually more determined. They work safer, as we said, low absenteeism, and a higher productivity. So those are things that are important to know itself. And the last question I would answer is, how can they know if an employer is really inclusive or not? Well, I think there's work that needs to be done on both sides. People will have to do researches on, for example, websites. looking deeper than just the first page to go and dig the information within the website, the company's website. But as well, I think companies will have to work on their branding too, and on sharing the information that they are diverse and inclusive. So it's all different things like that. They'll not need to be put out, you know. So I think it's we're in 2017. I think we're miles away from where we were, I'd say probably 10, 15 years ago, but there's still a lot of work to be done. So I guess I'll leave it to the presenter.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Francis. Really appreciate your comments there and hearing about Sodexo and what you're doing to kind of bridge the gap.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay. We have now, it's just after 1 o'clock Eastern Time, and we have some time for questions, obviously. And I haven't seen any come through the chat yet, but I would like to begin with one, if I may. And I'm going to ask this of Lisa, but Tim and Francis, feel free to comment as well. I know that a lot of us are going to be working with our accessibility or disability services offices within our institutions. If our experience is, if my colleagues have experiences similar to ours, those people are really busy in, with the student load that they may have or just within the institution. And I'm wondering how we may be able to, as offices, are there any resources available for us to be able to do sort of an audit of our services that we can kind of grab? Are there resources out there? I assume that SenseAbility would be an organization that could provide us with some resources, Lisa. But are there other places that we can look as well to begin maybe a little bit of an audit on our own before we would go to, say, our offices within our institutions?
Yes, so there are. One of the things that I would encourage you to do is reach out to us, perhaps become a member. We actually have a disability inclusion index that when you join, you take that identifies opportunities within your organization. We also have a library for members that is available on the website, full of information, not necessarily available to the general public, but that would be available for our members to support. But on our website as well, there is a searchable database with full of resources that we have compiled and through federal funding so that you can have a look through that as well. Anybody who has specific, it's just such an incredibly large field. So if you have specific questions, please email me. It's lisa.kelly@senseability.ca. It's on the opening slide, and hopefully I'll be able to direct you to where you might be able to go to find some of that. A lot of organizations also have a ton of resources available on their websites for specific disabilities. In terms of the employment piece and connecting with that, there's some good studies that have been published, but not a lot of great practical. I actually thought U of T's presentation last week was really great. This, that they provided you with. But certainly if you have specific questions, ask us and we'll try to hunt it down for you.
Okay.
Stefan, the other thing I'll add, it's Tim here. The other thing I'll add really quickly is that in my experience, after school, audit doesn't need to be a big scary word, right? People think of audit and they think of $300 an hour consultants who come in their Armani suits, but really all an audit is self-reflection and looking at how you as a team can be better in whatever you're auditing. But it doesn't, when I do my work through Disability Positive Consulting, one of my big practices is to empower the organizations and give them the knowledge to do a lot of it themselves and to make their own audit practices. And obviously you want to borrow from, organizations like mine or Canadian Business Sensibility, but the really important thing is to remember that really it's just an exercise in self-reflection. It doesn't have to be this big polished thing.
Yes, I think those are great comments, Tim. That was sort of what I got from Phil's presentation from University of Toronto Scarborough Management Co-op. their presentation was really, I mean, it was really just a look at, are we really sort of connecting with students? Is our website, and those are, is our website really compatible? Does it encourage students with disabilities? The language we use around some of our promotions, does it encourage students to participate? And, they were able to kind of determine some of that themselves, right? As you say, without necessarily having to do a formal, as you say, audit with $300 an hour consultants, right? So I think that was important. Last week, I think we'd had some questions as well, if I can continue with another, about the situation with disclosure. And I think for some of us, I know for some of us here at Ryerson, and certainly for practitioners elsewhere, there's a little bit of ambiguity around when and where we should be disclosing for students with disabilities, right? When's the best time during the employment process to do that? Any suggestions or any discussion around that?
I would answer that if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, sure. On our website, we have on Sodexo.ca, we have people can look for our job opportunities there. And as you create a profile, which you need to do to apply to our position, that profile will require a certain amount of questions. For example, if you're eligible for work in Canada, and if you have what's your salary expectancy and stuff like that. And they also has a non-mandatory question that asks if you do have a disability. And if you do, I encourage to disclose it so we can know have the information, and then use that, and in the interview then get through the process too of knowing what the needs are. Because I think from the get-go, it's such an important thing to know ahead of time and not come and hide. Because first of all, we do our interviews on the phone. Our first contacts are on the phone, so obviously you don't get to see the person unless they disclose it. We will not know. So it's important, I think, from the get-go for people to bring it up. It's very, very. I think clearly that should be at the point before interview. It should be brought up.
Yeah. Lisa, Kim, do you have any suggestions?
I'd like to add to that. I don't think there's ever one. This is always how and when you disclose.
Yeah.
I do agree, though, that if you never let the employer know you have a disability, they can't address diversity initiatives. So you may be shortchanging opportunities if you don't disclose. I think we all need to contribute to an environment where disclosing isn't something that you're hiding, or it isn't something that's wrong. It's just like a normal routine aspect of job. If you require something to get through an interview, or you require something on the job, it should just be kind of a straightforward, request. But having said that, again, it's always up to the individual. I would always encourage that you disclose what you require in terms of accommodation, but not focus on the disability. That, in my experience, would probably be where the coaching is required with students to prep them. Because oftentimes they've been told, don't tell. And so when they do start sharing information, sometimes they can be a bit injury, disability, or pain focused. And the employer's not really interested in that. What they really want to hear is what you're able to do.
It's Tim here. I'll just add really quickly. For me as a former job seeker, it was always about would disclosing my disability early, i.e. in the cover letter, be an asset to this job. So if the disability was, for example, in a disability office at a university, I would disclose it and my lived experience. But I didn't always do that because of the negative experiences that I had. But because my disability is so visible, I could never get away with not disclosing it eventually. But as Lisa said, I think it's very much a choice. There's not one right answer. And also, just to echo Lisa's other comment, which I think is so great, we need to make disclosure an empowerment, not a challenge, right? You need people to want to disclose because they recognize the value their disability brings to the role.
Excellent.
Can I just one other quick thought on that?
Yep.
As an employment counselor, I used to encourage this is awful. I used to encourage my clients generally not to disclose until after a job offer. I've come around 360 on that, or 180, I guess. Sorry.
Yeah.
I really would encourage now people to disclose. I think that things are changing, and we can't be part of that change if we don't give employers the opportunity to respond appropriately, particularly if they're signaling to us that they're open to this. So you've got Sodexo asking, right? You've got organizations that are showing they're working in the disability space. Those are signals to the job seeker that this employer is actually an inclusive employer and is interested and values you. So, I think hopefully things are changing. To Tim's point, it's slower than maybe we'd all like, but start looking, are there clues there that this is an inclusive employer? And if it is, really think about the value of disclosing. I think if somebody has a disability and they wait till a job offer, the chances are they're not going to perform to their optimal during interviews.
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much for that, Lisa. We have a question that's just come through. I'm also looking at the time. It's about 1:15 right now, so we'll go on for maybe another 5 minutes or so. But we have a question from Tracy Tessier. And Tracy, if you'd also like to speak to this while our guests are responding, you can unmute your phone by hitting the star and 7 key. But Tracy's question is, could someone speak to the best way to disclose if accommodations are required for mental health issues? So I'm not sure, all three of our speakers could address that if they're interested.
Well, that is my disability, so I guess I'll hop in there. So again, don't focus on the disability. It's what do you require? Hi, I require, actually, I was hoping that I might be able to have more frequent coffee breaks.
Okay.
Do you have flex hours? I work best with. So again, you're not necessarily disclosing the mental health condition, but you're talking about what you need in order to perform at your best.
Yeah. Okay. And Tracy, I don't know if that answers your question or if there's any more that you wanted to discuss. Okay, I'll take that as a no at this point. So thank you very much for the reply, Lisa.
No problem.
Yep, I'll wait to see if there's another question. Okay, Tracy just said that's good. Okay. Okay.
Tracy, this is one disability that does have stigma attached, just so you're aware of it. So you need to really work with the students on how to frame that in a positive manner. And again, that talks about what they require in order to do a good job, not on what they can or can't do or what are symptoms or what are the problems or barriers.
Yeah. We've got another question that's come through following on your comments, Lisa. It's from a Jasmine Bassi, and Jasmine says, what if the employer asks why you need those extra coffee breaks or why you need, flex time or something like that?
In order to perform to my greatest capacity.
Yeah, okay.
Again, when I used to coach people looking for jobs, we practiced this, and I try to be the most difficult employer on the other side so that the person was able to respond. I mean, you don't have to disclose what the actual disability is, so don't.
Yeah. So, Lisa, would you suggest then, I think one of the things that we may have to work with students on in co-op offices is how they advocate for themselves effectively in the interview process? Would that be safe to say?
Absolutely. So what I did find, I had to restructure my employment program to spend a lot more time helping students with the interview process, with disclosure, with requests for accommodations. And it paid off because, the numbers just rose dramatically. So you are going to have to spend some time up front assisting the students with this because they probably never thought about it in this way, but it will pay off. And it gives them life skills that they'll take forward into the job market as well as the co-op market. But yeah, you're going to have to spend some time with this. Yeah.
I know that some of us, we do some mock interviews on our campus, and I know a lot of other offices do the same. So we may want to look at mock interviews specifically around this kind of thing so that students learn how to advocate for themselves. I mean, now that could also help regular program students too, right? Students who who don't have a disability of any kind, because it's just about them being able to formulate some good responses to any adaptations that they might need at work.
Yeah, and when you look at the mental health in the campuses, I know that like anxiety issues, this is going to help anybody with declared or undeclared disability be able to cope with interviewing skills, and push back. So yeah, I think it works for all students.
Yeah. Jasmine, I hope that answers your question. We're almost at 1:20 now, and I don't see any other questions that have come through. I would just like to say, just in closing, if I may, that we invite, as I know for a lot of our audience, a lot of this information is sort of things that they're sort of digesting at this point in time and thinking about and will be using in their planning for the future. So if any of our members have any thoughts or questions, you can direct those through the PD committee, and we can get those to each of our presenters. I would like to thank, I'll just like to wrap up now, so I'd like to thank all of our speakers over both of these webinars. So Anne-Marie Fannin, the CAFKE president, who had the introduction last week and sort of kicked things off, Marie-Claude Gagnon from the University of Ottawa, Phil Brown and Kathleen McDowell from University of Toronto Management Co-op, Colleen Reed from the Accessibility Services Office at University of Toronto Scarborough. Today's speakers, Lisa Kelly from Canadian Business SenseAbility, Tim Rose from the Diversity Project Lead at Magnet, and Francis Vauclair from Sodexo. Really appreciate all of the speakers presenting on this topic. It's a great topic, and good to see that there's been some, there's some things moving forward with this. And obviously, as co-op offices nationally, we would like to move this initiative forward as well. For those of you on this call, Lisa actually had alerted us to a great 1-hour podcast on the CBC Radio website, and it's one of the CBC Radio shows called Out in the Open with Pia Chattopadhyay, right? And it's called Invisible Illness. We will be sending out a link to that to the particular web page, so that you can listen to the podcast. And in closing, just one final reminder for our audience, for co-op practitioners out there. If there are any future topics that you'd like the Professional Development Committee to bring forward in webinars in the future, please let us know. You can get in touch with Bruce Wilson, who is the PD Committee Chair at Redeemer University College. If there's anything that's come out of these two webinars that you'd like us to explore in greater depth, that would be great too. Just let us know. Again, thank you to all the presenters from today and last week, and thanks to our audience for joining us today. So I'll sign off and wish everyone the best for the remainder of the hiring cycle for those of you involved in co-op. Thank you very much. Thanks, Lisa, Tim, and Francis for today.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Okay.